Hello. So in the next lecture, we are going to discuss the business cycle. So yesterday, unfortunate news came that Britain finally decided to exit from the Euro, Brexit. This Brexit, then Trans-Pacific Partnership, RCP, all these contemporary topics we'll discuss under the economic survey units. But anyways, when the Brexit happened, so this business cycle becomes relevant from exam perspective, because this business cycle was the major reason of 2008 recession as well as the 1930s Great Depression. So what is business cycle? What do you understand? What is the definition of business cycle? So business cycle is nothing but it is the periodic upswings and downswing phase of the economic activity is known as business cycles. So there will be regular upswings, there will be downswings, upswings, downswings, upswings, downswings. That is known as the business cycle. Then there will be an expansion phase as the business cycle, just like the economy will grow, just like the IT boom came during 1990s, and then it contract, and then again it will boom, again it will contract. So the full economy, the world economy as well as the Indian economy as well as any country's economy, it will expand and it will contract. So it's a regular process. Then we will discuss the features of the business cycle, like in which all economies this business cycle takes place. What is the reason of the business cycle? So the first feature of the business cycle is it is due to the cause of the business cycle is in the fluctuations in the aggregate demand. Suppose today the demand of this pen is 500. So we need 500 pen in Indian economy, and suppose tomorrow few of the institutes they file bankruptcy. So the business is gone, now the demand becomes less, and now if the demand is just 200, so the company which was making this pen, their financial health, their financial situation will start deteriorating. So this is at the microeconomic level. Think about the macroeconomic level. Across the economy, the full economy, the demand of the full economy decreases. The reasons can be any. Maybe it just the assumption that the economy, the speculations that the economy is going to recession. May it because of inflation. When the inflation increases, the price will increase. Suppose the price of this pen at present it is 30 rupees, and maybe after 1 month or 2 months it becomes 50 rupees. So when the price will increase, the aggregate demand will decrease. For whatsoever reason, maybe it can be the dependency. Suppose the recession came in 2008 in USA and Indian economy also get impacted. So the reasons can be n. For whatsoever reason, if the aggregate demand is being fluctuated, that may cause the business cycle. That may cause this contraction phase of the business cycle. Then it is a characteristic of the developed countries. Usually, whatever this contraction phase or the recession, it starts from the developed country. And why developed country? Why not developing country? Because we discussed what was the reason of recession. So the reason of recession is when the supply becomes more than the demand. When the aggregate supply, the supply of this pen will be more than the demand of this pen, that will be the trigger point of the recession. When AS will be more than AD, then companies will decrease their production. And when companies will decrease their production, so they need less manpower. They don't want to recruit more people. So they will decrease their recruitment, or they will start sacking. Whatever employees, they want to decrease their manpower. And when they will decrease their recruitment or increase this sacking, then that is going to decrease the purchasing power, the money availability. If they will not get the salary, from where they will buy the commodities? So that is going to decrease the purchasing power of even society as a whole. And when their purchasing power will decrease, their aggregate demand is going to decrease. And when aggregate demand will decrease, aggregate supply will become more than the aggregate demand. So this is going to become a vicious cycle. By whatsoever reason, if aggregate supply becomes more than aggregate demand, then that is going to cause a vicious cycle. Now you have to break this vicious cycle. The government should intervene. That we will discuss between whether there is a requirement of involvement of government or not. That was there in classical model or the model propounded by Adam Smith, and how the Keynes gave the recommendation. That we will discuss in the last topic. So the government hits at this level, the government will intervene, and here the government will intervene, and the government will increase the purchasing power of society. And how government can increase the purchasing power? Government will give the money. Now supply of money can be through different tools. The objective is to increase the money supply. How the government can increase the money supply? Maybe the RBI can increase the money supply. RBI will decrease CRR, SLR, bank rate and all these things. This is one option. The second option is government can decrease the taxes. Government can increase their social welfare programs. Engineering outlay can be increased. So all these are the options through which the government can intervene and increase the money supply. But to break this vicious cycle, you should hit here, increase the purchasing power of the society. When this purchasing power will decrease, aggregate supply will increase, and this aggregate supply will become aggregate demand, or aggregate demand will become more than aggregate supply. So the problem of aggregate supply and aggregate demand is a characteristic of the developed countries. It's not there in the developing countries. Take the case of India. India's aggregate demand is much more than the aggregate supply, and that is what the characteristic of the developing countries. All these developing countries, their demand is more and the supply is less. We need $1 trillion for infrastructure development, and we don't have money. We don't have the infrastructure, we don't have road, no connectivity is there, and because of no connectivity, the perishable agriculture commodities, they are getting wasted in the rural areas, in the farmlands, and because of that we have inflation. So the aggregate supply more than the aggregate demand is the characteristic of the developed countries. That is why the business cycle, it is the characteristic of the developed countries and not the developing countries. Then it is also a characteristic of the capitalist economies. We discussed under the first part of the microeconomics, we have the capitalist economic model, then the centrally planned economic model, and also the mixed economy model. So under that capitalist economies, the sources or of production, distribution and all, whatever the natural resources, they are owned by the private entities. They are not owned by the society. So under the capitalist economies, if I am holding the some resources, I am holding the production. So if suppose the income is increasing, my profit is increasing, the demand is increasing, so I will make more and more and more. If I don't have that insight that what is the actual aggregate demand, it is possible that I will indulge in overproduction, and when overproduction will be there, so aggregate supply will be more than the aggregate demand, and when aggregate supply more than aggregate demand, that will be the trigger of this vicious cycle. Then it is irregular, the upswings and downswing phase. Suppose this is there and this is the first one. So this upswing and downswing phases, they are irregular. If this is what the first phase and it lasted for 10 years, it's not necessary that the second phase will last for 10 years. It can last for 5 years also. It depends. The recession came in 1930s. That recession was huge. That was a big depression. In 2008 also the recession came. In 1970s, early 1970s also the recession came. But it is irregular. It's not like every 10 years it will come, every 15 years it will come. It is possible that even after 5 years it can come, after 20 years it can come. So it is irregular and it differs in the magnitude. 1930 was the depression, very big, and 2008 it is just the recession. Then we have, there are 4 phases of business cycle. These 4 phases are: the first phase is known as boom. So these are the four phases of the business cycle. The first phase is boom. Boom means the upswing phase of the business cycle is known as boom. Then we have the recession. There are two different definitions of recession. The first definition is two successive quarters having a negative GDP growth. If for two consecutive quarters there is a negative GDP growth of any economy, then we say that this economy is facing recession. So this is one characteristic. But think about India. In case of India, we also said that Indian economy faced recession in 2011-12. Of course, the actual recession of in Western world, it came in 2008, 9, 10, 11. Still, the Europe is facing recession. The USA has overcome it. But once this Brexit has happened, then there are chances of double dip recession. But Indian economy faced the impact of recession slightly late. So if there is two consecutive quarter, then is known as it is known as the recession. But India never faced negative growth rate. Our growth rate just decreased. In 2007, 2008, our GDP growth rate was more than 8%, even touched 9%. And in 2012 or 13, 11, it was slightly more than 4%. Before that, GDP base year revision. Although by that mathematical thing, we increased the GDP growth rate from 4.7% to almost 5.56%, even more than 6%. But actually it decreased from 9% to 4 or 5%. So the second definition is drastic fall. These are the economic definitions. If there is drastic fall in growth, in GDP growth, then that is known as the recession. So there are two definitions of recession. The first one is if there is a negative GDP growth for two successive quarters, it is known as a recession. The second one is if there is drastic fall in the GDP growth rate, that is also known as recession. Then the third phase is depression. Depression is nothing but prolonged and severe recession is known as depression. If there is recession for 10 quarters, 15 quarters, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year, then that is known as depression. In 1930s, it lasted for more than 10 years. So that was regarded as depression. So depression is severe and prolonged recession is known as depression. Then we have the fourth phase, that is the recovery phase. So recovery means when again the aggregate demand is increasing, the unemployment is decreasing, the national income is increasing. So this is known as the recovery phase, and this is the final phase of the business cycle.